Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for February 2021. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs. By sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/Rogue Watson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we're glad to have you. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard Princess, Christopher, Star Loverly, Thomas, and Ldugs92. Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Dogs Barking, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus Dead, Vicente, Gilberto, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Arash, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Scalia, Nick, and Farty McButterpants. Thank you all very much for your support. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll, is Experience, XP, or EXP, usually XP, one of the most coveted of rewards in RPGs, yet tricky to deal with in D&D, which only supports XP as a reward for defeating monsters and enemies, which is definitely going to be the topic. Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Sam.
Good morning.
Good morning. Farty.
Hello, everybody.
And special guest, you know him as Mr. Mannix, you know him as Kalinar, and you know him as our occasional excellent DM, Chris.
Hey, sir.
Hello. Sam, you were here first, so I want to know your thoughts on experience. Do you use, first of all, the rules as written, where you just dole out experience from defeating monsters, or do you use a different method?
So, as a DM, I have only ever done milestones. I've never used the actual system of XP. I've played in a campaign where we used XP, but yeah, I've never used it myself. I just prefer, like, both of the campaigns that I've run have lasted 18 months, 2 years plus, and are still going. So, if I'd been using XP, it probably would have out-leveled the story. So I found it better to sort of slow things down and control when things get bigger and when I need to change up the enemies and encounters and all that sort of stuff. So I have some control over the difficulty.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. Farty, what are your experience methods for your games?
I have used XP before. I'm using Milestone now. My challenge with Milestone is I think you level up very quickly off the start, and then people get used to leveling up quickly, so they're always asking, when are we going to level up? And it feels like all of a sudden you got superheroes and you're like, okay, slow down, these monsters are, you guys are destroying everything.
Yeah, part of that's the power creep problem in D&D too. Chris, interestingly enough, I know you've used a combination, as have I.
Yeah, I've done both.
Yeah.
I think there's bonuses and drawbacks to both of them. I think, which actually I have a question at the end of this, is there really no errata or anything written down anywhere about XP as a reward for other things other than combat?
That's a good question. I
that
admit,
must be written down somewhere. I can't imagine it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't fully do my homework for this session, but as far as I'm aware, they've never. And what's weird is you think they would have added
numbers around it, but yeah.
Yeah, you think they would have added something in like a Xanathar's or the Tasha's, where it was like, hey, if you want to give out rewards for quests or skill challenges or social encounters, like here's a guide to do that. And as far as I know, they haven't done that.
Right. Here's my problem with the way Dungeons and Dragons, the company, does XP, is that they have these mechanical number-based rules, but then they make these campaigns that have assigned levels per section of the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So they're cheating. They're saying, like, okay, use number XPs, but also level your people up whenever they get to this point in the story.
Yeah.
Which is basically Milestone.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
it's like they're just, at this point, they just suggest Milestone, I feel like, too. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's real tricky because it's so much of the balance is level based in D&D.
For sure. That's how the DM is able to calculate like what he should do, how much damage a trap should do, how much damage a monster should do. All that's just based on how much XP your players have. So when that changes is that's a big deal.
And what Farty was saying on the superhero problem about the power creep is a huge problem in D&D in general. And I know some people like to run more like hardcore, challenging games, but the 5th edition, at least, specifically 5th edition, is very much geared towards like power fulfillment and making your heroes as powerful as possible, as fast as possible. And very quickly, probably starting around level 5, they start getting real strong. And I mean, just the fact that you can leap off, a 30-foot building and survive like no problem. Like normal people can't fucking do that. Normal, medieval style fantasy adventurers normally can't do that, but in D&D you absolutely can. Like you are just so dang strong.
Think about what's 3d6. What is that average?
3.5 damage a dice.
Yeah. So if you think about at level damage. 1, you could die jumping 30 feet off of a building.
Yeah.
At level 5, it's maybe half your health, maybe.
Not even that, dude. If it's like 10 hit points, if
it's like really good, it's
yeah.
So really quickly it becomes like, I sprained my ankle jumping off this 30-foot building.
I like full damage being capped at 8d6, no matter how far you fall.
Yeah, I've done both. Obviously, when we started doing D&D, I just did it as written because that's what most people are going to do. They're just going to play it as written, and I think it worked out okay in like Phandelver. And then when we got to Princes, that's when I started hacking together like a homebrew XP system where I rewarded experience for completing quests. And I based that on certain like encounter levels of encounter. They calculate if you face this many monsters, it's this kind of encounter level rating. And I gave that somehow I calculated that to different quest rewards, and that seemed to work out okay. And generally, I think everybody was where they needed to be. But also, the whole time you're thinking like, gosh, this would be easier if it just leveled people up when they entered that area.
Right.
And
the
you didn't have to worry about
it. You're just you're inching your way that direction anyway. With that, okay, well, instead of XP as a function of just sheer what you've done, now it's a function of like, okay, the different ways you could solve a problem. Like, okay, you've finished a quest, here's some XP. Oh, you roleplayed that, you didn't kill anybody. All right, here's the XP you would have gotten for killing them. Whatever.
I think.
But but when you start making those delineations, you're still choosing when they level up, essentially.
Yeah.
Because you're choosing when to give them the numbers and when not to.
Milestones of extra steps.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what it is.
I think, they have not done a true open world adventure. And I'm not sure how many people actually want that in a tabletop RPG. I think a lot of people would rather have, more focused storytelling. And frankly, running an open world RPG from a DM point of view, it seems like a fucking nightmare, especially on a virtual tabletop where you have to like prep that stuff. But that would be the scenario where I think you could do experience, where it was more like literally like a Zelda Breath of the Wild or something, or Skyrim or one of those where it's like maybe there's a main story, but also you can just go around wherever you want, and thus you can kind of make your own path and get your own like that's where I could see rewarding experience as being something that you wouldn't want to do milestone wise, because at that point there is no like, I don't know where they're going to be at any one time.
Right.
Versus how pretty much all of the adventures are designed in 5th edition, which is by chapter. It's like, here's chapter 1, then you move on to chapter 2, then you move on to chapter 3. And each of those chapters is like, hey, the player should be this level when they get to this chapter. And like Sam just said, like, you're just doing milestone with extra steps if you're like, okay, well, I need to get them to this level by this chapter, which means if they've gotten there already, oh shit, I need to cut back on content. And if they haven't, I just need to throw some random encounters on there. And that's the other problem, is that experience in D&D, again, I believe, somebody in the comments can maybe correct me, but I believe is only rewarded for defeating monsters, which raises several problems.
It's your hammer nail argument at that point.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, the only way I'm going to advance is by killing things, so therefore I must kill things.
And how do you reward people for getting past a encounter that involves monsters that's not combat related? That's something that I ran into in Princes a lot. and something that made me motivate me to go to Milestone is like, well, why would your players want to sneak past this enemy when they get experience for killing the enemy? Now, for the DM solution is to say, well, I'll reward you experience, maybe the full experience, maybe half the whatever calculation I want to use for sneaking past the enemy. But then you have to tell your players, oh, but then you can't turn around and kill this enemy because I just gave you double XP.
Right.
You know, it just creates a lot of weird problems like that.
You can't double up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of hacks you could do. Like you could, there's RPGs where if you like pick a lock, you gain experience, or you discover a new area, you gain experience. Like, you can go really crazy with it. And when I'm playing a video game, I love experience. Like, it's one of the best things to get. I love leveling up. I love getting stronger. Anytime there's an XP reward, I will go after that. It's why we do other things. So it sucks to lose that in D&D.
That's true. Yeah, and if you are using XP as a number, there's fun things you can do with it. One of the things that I think worked back in Storm Kings, one of the things that I look back fondly of is just sort of like, I'm going to do experience this way. It was just a weird, I forget what the encounter was. There were sinking ships, and you guys had to just like choose whether you were going to help the people who were in the sinking ships, essentially, on this harbor. And I was like, all right, depending on how well they do and how much stuff they pull out, how many people they pull out, I've got these set amounts of experience I'm going to give them at the end of the session. So it turned like a kind of skill check, problem solving encounter into a XP generating thing.
Yeah. And so that's just you hacking together.
Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also there is that silent agreement between the DM and the players that if you guys know you're getting experience for just doing things in the world, you have the incentive to, we need to save these people in these ships.
Yeah.
Versus maybe if it was Milestone, maybe they'd, you just be like, well, that's not related to our problem, so we're not even walking over there. Yeah,
you can't trust your players just role playing to be good people. It's like, but we're gonna give you that's also a video game background too. Is like you do things because you expect the things to give you experience. Like you're almost all these things are a quest, or they become a quest or something. Or if I'm using a skill, then I get rewarded in some way for doing that, and not just the reward of like I helped somebody. I mean, in theory, that should be the reward enough, but let's face it, we're playing a game, we're trying to get stronger and progress. And you could rule the fact that you are, gaining experience is also you learning to be a better person, but you're also gaining experience to be stronger and gain new skill points, whatever else you want to rule it as.
I'm not even sure that's necessarily a bad thing for players to just sort of, without having that incentive, that XP incentive, to sort of ignore things like that. Like, going back to your video game example, there's tons of video games out there where you do things because you're going to get XP for them. But if you sit there and think about it, I'm like, hey, I just got done playing Horizon. I'm this huntress who's saving the post-apocalypse. I just got a quest to assassinate some dudes. I don't like this doesn't work for me as like this character. You're sending me out to murder these people. But it's a sub-quest. It's a quest that you get experience for. So I did it.
I suppose from a tabletop point of view, if you don't do the stuff, then there could be negative consequences.
Yes.
Like the sinking ships. If the way I would have it in as a milestone is that, yes, you're not necessarily getting a XP reward, but let's say you're from the Order of the Gauntlet and they find out that you decided that you weren't going to help these people, what then happens? So if you've got, like my guys, I have a paladin and a cleric in the party that are both working with the Order of Gauntlet. If they don't do something like that, then there would be there might be repercussions, and that's what they've got to balance. It tends to be how I would encourage the correct behavior.
Without that XP whip.
Exactly.
You guys are role player guys. I
give them the stick rather than the carrot,
Yeah.
Do the thing.
I like that a lot. I think I come too much from a video game background and not enough from a RPG background in terms of thinking of the actual consequences, the rewards, in terms of gaining like networking and connections to people, and also the other side of that, which is gaining the ire and possible enemies of people. I was thinking in terms of like, no, experience and leveling up and progression.
Right.
I suppose another thing with the giving XP for non-combat encounters is who. So in a combat counter, it's pretty generally considered that everybody contributes equally. You know, yes, the fighter probably doing the most damage, but the bard is helping the fighter do that damage, or the cleric is keeping them alive. So that they all have an equal sort of part. But let's say you sneak your way through a dungeon with some traps and some monsters. Yes, everyone might have to do a couple of sneak checks, but the rogue is probably then disarming all the traps and finding all the traps and unlocking all the doors. So do you give all of the XP from all of those tasks? Do you spread that out equally, or like I suppose that's probably one of the reasons why I tend to steer clear of XP and stick to milestones. It's that everybody will have moments to shine.
Yeah.
So rather than rewarding each person individually, you reward them as a group. And that way they all feel like they're working together all the time.
That for me raises an even bigger question. Is anybody here ever allowed asynchronous XP among your players?
Yeah, Fardy, have you explored that at all?
No, the challenge I have with that is then you potentially could have one character a level or two ahead of the others, and
that sounds bad, right?
That would be horrible. Yeah, people would
it just doesn't sound good for anybody.
Yeah,
I think one challenge, the thing I like about XP is you know where you stand. So I know, like the player knows, okay, my character's got this much XP. They need to get to this to get to the next level. Okay, then I can get this stuff. With milestone, I almost feel sometimes I'm just like, yeah, okay, bump you up to 4. I think, why not? It sounds good right here, which just seems so arbitrary.
Yeah.
Older editions of D&D, and I know because I'm just now streaming Icewind Dale on the Let's Plays, they did have asynchronous. Well, they had synchronous XP, but the classes leveled up asynchronously.
Oh, right.
Which I'd forgotten about. I think starting in 3rd edition they got away with that, I want to say. But in Icewind Dale 2nd edition, and straight up like Thieves, it's like 1250 to level up. And you go all the way up to like a mage, which is like 2200. It's almost twice as much to get to the next level as it is a thief. Which is bizarre.
Would they become stronger? Like, is the power that they get from moving to that next level better than the other one? I don't like that might be.
I mean, I haven't analyzed it, but from what I remember, mages definitely can get a lot stronger. So the idea is it just takes you a lot longer to get there versus the thief that kind of plateaus, I guess, more. But still, it just doesn't seem fun because you start off so extra shitty as a level 1 mage. You have like 4 hit points and 1 spell. And it takes you twice as long to level up as your thief, who gets his like sneak attack all the time right off the bat. Like, that's, thankfully it's not the case anymore, but I have not encountered, it's too bad we don't have more folks, but I would be interested to see if somebody did reward experience differently amongst the team. Because I know, like, in some RPGs, like, if you've got, I think it was like maybe the Wasteland games did this, where if like one person, cracked a safe or something, opened a lock, then only that character got the experience for doing it. So, like, you specifically only got experience for characters using their abilities. Outside of combat, I believe inside of combat it was either shared or it might have been per kill. So they did end up slightly differently.
It's even worse.
Yeah, that might have. Yeah, it might have been shared. It might have been like when somebody died, everybody that was in the fight got experience shared. But I know outside of combat, it just anybody that used a skill, like if you disarmed a trap or something, then only the person doing that thing would get the experience.
Yeah, Wasteland had shared XP on combat and individual for skill checks.
Yeah. It's only finished Wasteland 3.
I was just going to say that if the challenge with that is, then if one person does part of it, or then everybody's fighting to get that that XP. Oh, I'm going to do it. No, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. It doesn't seem
let's
cooperation.
What happens then in D&D is everybody starts relocking the door and unlocking it, and they just fucking stand there and grind out the XP. Until we're like level 20.
Sorry, DM. This is the way it's gonna go.
This is the way it's gonna go. Somebody's gonna stand watch. We're just gonna open and unlock this door 1,000,000 times. Yeah, that system obviously has some flaws. I do wish there was at least some system for people that don't want to use milestones. I do feel like that's kind of where everybody's heading towards, if not already. There was at least some official way of rewarding experience outside of combat. they said like, hey, here's a guide for skill challenges and social situations, maybe how much experience you should reward for those. Here's a guide for if players bypass monsters and how you handle that if they then go back and fight those monsters, or just some kind of tips for doing that. And then here's a guide for if you want to set up your own little quest system, which I always like doing ever since I think we first started doing D&D. I started doing little like a journal type quest log, and then in Princes, that's when I turned those quests into like actual, hey, you got experience for completing these quests. And it's too bad there's just not an official system for that, because I would be interested to know like what the numbers would look like and what the pacing would look like. I know a big complaint in Tomb, because my wife tells me this all the time, is that we leveled up way too slowly, which I definitely get that, because we spent 2 years and we made it to level 11, which is pretty damn slow. I mean, Ack Inc. is probably the leader of slow leveling, because they've been playing for like 8 years and they're level 9 or something. But
they play
like 3 times a year. Yeah. And we were playing once a week. Yeah, so ours was extreme on that extreme, and that was definitely too slow a pacing. That was just that campaign, and I had not necessarily paced that out very well, which is interesting, because had we done normal leveling in that campaign, I think we would have vastly over-leveled for all of the content.
Right.
And I don't know how it would have been, how you're supposed to even run that Tomb of Annihilation campaign and in regular experience. I'd be fascinated to know how folks did that and what the level rate was in terms of how much encounters you're supposed to run while hex crawling through that jungle. It's pretty nuts.
During the hex crawl?
And it's only supported for tier 1. Like once you reach like level 4 or 5, you're generally like out leveled the entire jungle.
Right.
So that's why I was trying to keep you guys as low as possible, in that sweet tier 1 spot for as low as possible. But the caveat was you were in that, low levels for like 30 or 40 sessions or something ridiculous.
Right.
So I've learned my lesson there, I will say. As much I think Milestone, and obviously Chris, you did Milestone for your campaign, which yours is very linear, and it feels like it goes very much like, all right, you're this level, here's your dungeon. Yeah. This level, here's your dungeon.
the argument against what you were saying earlier about it being arbitrary. Like when do we choose to level them up? In the milestone system. If you've got a structured campaign, you don't have to worry about that, because it's up to you, and you just you build the story however you want to build the story, which is what I'm doing now. Is like, all right, here's the set piece, here's the climax of the set piece, then they level up. Yeah, like that's the hard line I'm drawing here. If you were doing anything even remotely open world, then you definitely get into those weeds of like, well, this isn't really an epic encounter. This isn't like a big set piece that's happened. That's capped off a thing. They haven't completed some quest, but it kind of feels like they've been at this level for a long time.
Yeah.
I think there's, if you're playing, like if we go to Tombs, and it sort of plays into when we talked about travel recently. When you get past a certain level, like random encounters sort of become pointless, because either you have to throw something sort of proper boss level at a higher level party just to make the encounter worthwhile.
Right.
Like if you do that via XP, when you stop doing those encounters, because you don't want to just throw 400 bandits at someone just because that's what they need to, because of their level. How you've then got to make sure that the encounters that they do have, there's enough XP for them there to level up. And as you're saying, if you've got a linear campaign, which most of the pre-made modules are pretty linear. I mean, even I'm running Princes for 2 separate groups. Realistically, apart from the early levels, when you actually start getting into the cult proper, it's relatively linear. It's just which one of the 4 do you go to first.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I think that's a fine design for, not to go too off topic, but to do fairly linear, but just if you give your players enough options at certain intervals, then I feel like they don't feel like they're being led along a path. Just give them some branching choice, and even if it's just a determination of like which ones do you want to tackle in what order, like even that I think can give your players a lot of freedom, like they're still making the choices.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think my players would ever say they've been railroaded by anything in that campaign, but
yeah,
I've known mostly where they're gonna go, just by like what they're talking about and whereabouts they are on the map, they tend to go, well, which one's closest? Or
and that's a tricky campaign because each of those, that's what Chris was saying, each of those dungeons is designed for a specific level. Despite most of those dungeons being completely interconnected with one another, and very few of them stop a player from going from like a level 6 dungeon to a level 9 dungeon just by like sliding down a purple worm skeleton or something.
My first party went to the fireplace hill, went straight down into the fire temple, and then straight down into the Fane of the Eye.
Oh, damn.
Without visiting any of the other surface keeps or that. So from my first campaign, I learned to put up a few walls. I split the 4 temples up and blocked off all of the entrances to the Fane until they're high level. But they quickly realised that they were in a place that was probably not good for them, and left, and then went and did the rest of it. But yeah, they came very close to mucking it up.
Yeah.
But I think that was it's part of the fun that once you get into these places, you can have a explore.
But that's a tricky one to milestone, because do you just try to lead them? Because I think they're supposed to do all the surface ones first, then the temples, then the Fane, and then the nodes. Is that how it works?
That's basically how I've structured the second group. I've blocked off the Fane of the Eye until they get until they've done all 4 temples. I let them do the 4 surfaces in any order that they wanted, because really there's not a huge difference between them.
Yeah.
And when you compare them, I mean, the temples, there's a 3-level gap between the temples, and it's like I think 8 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
They're not hugely different, really. An 8th level character to an 11th level character, relatively easy to tweak the balance. That if they go to the 8th level one last, you can make it a bit harder quite easily.
That's probably true.
Just sort of like readdress it. So like, if you keep them, so you do the surfaces and then you do the temples and then you do the Fane, it's relatively easy to tweak those a bit.
Because
I gave them choice to go off and do all the side quests as well, so they actually ended up being a couple of levels higher when they started the temple than they should have been anyway. Because I thought, but if you do half the side quests, I'm going to give you a level. You do the other half the side quests, I'm going to give you a level. I homebrewed an entire section in the Shadowfell to do with the Shadow Dragon.
Ooh.
So
I never did that.
They gained 3 levels that they that weren't part of the structure. So I then had to go through and level everything up by a couple of levels. But that it's not hugely difficult, especially when you've got the structure there already. Like the Earth Temple, wherever they had a regular bandit, I just upped them to a monk, and wherever they had a monk, I upped them to a guard. So it was everything just scales.
It's the Skyrim. It's the Skyrim leveling. Like the world levels up with you.
Yeah, so you go into a crypt and it's all Draugr overlords.
Exactly. Yeah. You're bringing weapons. They're bringing semi-automatics. It just keeps on escalating from there. We did not do milestone experience when we did princes, and I remember I didn't change much leveling either. We straight up skipped an entire dungeon at the end. I want to say it was the Fire Temple, I think. I don't know if you remember, Chris, but
I don't.
And then another one we just ran through just to get from like one area to another, and did only like a couple rooms.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. So based on that, I know that doing non-milestone meant we definitely over-leveled, because we were the correct level going into the final dungeon, which was the Fire Node. But I know specifically we straight up skipped an entire, I believe it was the Fire Temple. Because once they access
I don't know what the difference is between the Fire Node and the Fire Temple, so probably we skipped one of those.
Yeah, so the surface ones are the, whatever you want to call them, the monk place for. By the way, spoilers for Prince of the Apocalypse. And the tower for the air guys, and then the temples. They all have their like themed dungeons basically, right, that you get to, and then there's the Fane, which is kind of the caves that connect them all, and then down beneath are the really like elemental ass dungeons that actually have like the portals in there, and those you have to do, I believe, all 4 of those.
If you want to save the world, then yeah.
If you want to save the world, portals. Yeah, you got to shut the portals down. So those you have to do, but technically the temples, you can skip some of them because the bosses move around according to the order of the events. Like the first time that you reach the Fane, or the first time you fight a boss, at some point one of the bosses moves out of their dungeon, goes somewhere else, and then the very last one moves out of the dungeon to go into the very final node, so that obviously they're there for the final confrontation. And it just so happens where you can easily skip one of the dungeons, and because we were doing not milestone, maybe that freed me up to not force the players to necessarily, I mean, not force, but just didn't feel like it was necessary to go through that dungeon. Now, what I probably should have done in hindsight is done more content and scaled everything up more to higher levels, because I think knowing that I just didn't know at the time that like all the D&D campaigns ended like right around that same era, and it would have been more interesting. And I will say, as a tease for our next campaign, it is one of those campaigns that straight up does the usual like 1 to 11 thing. I am going to be hacking together and adding a lot of content specifically to the middle of the campaign, and then upscaling the last areas of the campaign and try to end things closer to like 14 or 15, but still doing milestone, because it just seems like the way to go now. Like it's I feel bad because it feels like it takes away from the players to give peace of mind to the DM and make things easier for the DM to plan around. And as a player, I know getting experience is fun. I mean, any video game, like I said, is really fun, and I think in RPGs it's still really fun. And I think you have to, although I've already warned us about this, you have to be able, if you're doing milestone, you have to be able to dole out those levels at a decent pace. And decent pace is obviously going to mean different things to players and to DMs, because that power creep is a real thing. And you know, most DMs are going to have content prepared at each different level, and you're going to look at your stuff going, gosh, these players just, you know, this area they spent more sessions at than I expected. They went through a lot. They're going to expect a level up here, but I have this whole other area that I didn't want them to advance too much. And that's a bigger deal in the lower levels. Like Sam was mentioning, maybe the difference between 8 and 11 isn't that big, but the difference between like 3 and 5 is astronomical. And that can be huge in terms of prepping that stuff out. So that's always something that's hard to plan, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm running through that challenge right now because I'm running 2 open world campaigns, Curse of Strahd and Rime of the Frostmaiden. So it's tough to know when to level them up, but then, you know, like Rime, they're going to a place where it's like, okay, this is not good.
I can't level you guys up this much.
Whereas Strahd, they're starting to get pretty powerful. I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute, we still got a few places that you guys need to check out.
Yeah, without spoiling anything on Rime, because obviously we're running that next. That one at least does have some notes. So it does start off kind of open worldy, but it does say on there like, hey, after the players do this many quests, they reach this level, and then after they do this many quests, they reach this level. Which that one is a pretty good indicator of like, okay, at that point we're kind of giving them XP for quests, and it just so happens that like the things they do along the way aren't going to give you XP. It's just completing the quest is like checking. It's almost like checking a box. And then once you check off like 3 boxes, then you've leveled up. And then for the next level up, once you check off another 3 boxes, then you're leveling up again. And then at some point in Rime, it just kind of converts into like chapter by chapter mode. But part of the hack I'll be doing is not necessarily going into that quickly, and instead going back to okay, here's some things you have to accomplish. And and still give the players like, you can choose the order in which you want to tackle these things. And in some cases, that could determine that you might be a higher level for this area, versus had you done this area first, you might be a higher level for the other area, which could be interesting strategy for the players to try to figure out. In which case, I don't know how much I would upscale. I guess depends on the levels, but that gives you more freedom for the players and still stick to that milestone leveling. Does anybody want to go back from milestone? Has anybody not liked milestone experience? Exactly.
So, yeah, I played one campaign where we the DM stuck strictly to XP as written in the book.
I can see a creepy shadow of my wife raising her hand in the background. she likes the XPs.
But yeah, we played one game that was XP by the book. We played Fandelver, and we actually ended up not reaching. I think you're supposed to get to level 5. We ended up not reaching it because even though we did most, like all the encounters that we found, we missed a couple of side quests that I know from playing it before.
Go outside,
but yeah,
we get some fight some
went
wolves.
Into the final boss. Yeah, well, because he ran it all by the book, so we didn't do those quests. We didn't find anything else, and then we went into the final boss at level 4, and we still won, but it felt a bit like, especially knowing that the campaign was supposed to go to 5, and that our characters didn't get the cool stuff that you get at level 5. It was like, if we'd done this as milestones, we actually would have ended up having more stuff to play with, because you would have made us level 5 to go into the boss. So the only time that I've actually experienced XP, it just didn't work very well. Certainly not as well as the same campaign that I played with milestones.
And we talked about this on Travel last month, but using milestone also really, really screws up random encounters. Like, random encounters are already just a huge time sink in tabletop RPGs, and usually the way they can be made palatable by the players is that they're getting experience for it. So they're getting something for it, even if it's just nothing else. They're getting experience, XP. If you're using milestone, those random encounters don't give you shit. I mean, they might give you a little bit of loot, but you lose that sense of like, oh well, at least we're not running around. It's a classic old like JRPG thing from the 90s where you're just like roaming around the same 2 pixels, just getting into fights and getting experience. Like, if you're using milestone, that doesn't happen at all. So instead, all of those fights just become a slog. Now, yeah, you can use them to, and I'm specifically talking about combat encounters. Like, you can do like, skill checks and things that can be fun, enjoyable, just not a huge amount of time spent for it. Just mainly combat is, always just takes a long time. And especially the higher level you go, just the longer it's going to take. And if you're not getting experience for that stuff, then what are those random encounters really doing that you can't just explain away? You could almost just say like, hey, you ran into a bunch of monsters, you fought, everybody takes this much damage and expends a spell slot and then move on. Which feels weird, but like you're just not getting experience for it.
Yeah, but it's no loss to me. I mean, it's kind of off topic, but I think random encounters are bullshit anyway. Because this is a little off topic, but at its heart, D&D is group storytelling, and I'm putting the emphasis on the word storytelling because if you imagine any of your favorite stories, you're telling a story. Any of your favorite stories, like they are not comprised of a series of random fights where wolves that have nothing to do with anything just come out of the woods. Like, I mean, and some certain, great stories do have like random, combat things that happen. Like,
well, okay, what about
The Hobbit? You get attacked by spiders. Like, that's a random encounter, right?
And the Mandalorian, they got the ice spider episode. That feels pretty random encountering.
But that's a whole sequence. That's like a quest right there. That's a quest sequence. A random encounter would be if, after they get out of the ice spider cave, they land and there's just some random ice bandits who start shooting at them. That would be a random encounter.
Mando is just a series of not very well linked quests anyway.
That's very true.
That's very true.
It is a series
I love
of
it,
quests.
but the overall arc is a bit disjointed.
Yeah, that's your problem with your open world storytelling right there.
Yeah.
You just end up doing a bunch of fuck all.
That's the problem with that sort of like random quest based storytelling anyway. But random encounters are just 10 times worse than that. It's just a bigger scale version of that where it's like, okay, now there's not even a story associated with this thing that's happening. Now there's not. Now this time you don't even have a little frog lady with her frog eggs that you got to protect.
Yeah.
Now it's just a totally random, creature out in the Arctic that's gonna run at you and try to kill you.
I mean, and this is for a different topic for traveling stuff, but if you take away the rest, then it becomes a dungeon crawl. And then it becomes, and you've done this too, Chris, during our current campaign, where you have quote unquote an encounter outside of the dungeon, and it just ends up almost being a part of the dungeon. It's like, oh well, you're not going to rest between now and the dungeon. This is just to soften up your resources. Yeah.
Yep.
And that I can see as being useful, but only if you're obviously not allowing your players to just immediately long rest and recharge. Because if you are, then it becomes really pointless to do those encounters. That's very true.
But I'm also not. I mean, mechanically, that's a good argument. But I'm thinking more like thematically. Like for me, like in the current campaign, it would be like if you guys were attacked by like beholders in the middle of the night. Like that has nothing to do with what's going on in the story.
Yeah.
Like who the fuck cares what some random beholders are doing?
Right.
If you're gonna have a random encounter, have it at least be part of the story.
Yeah, and yours have all been like directly linked to like either the area or the overarching story.
Right. So that's, or at least have it be like a, make it a mini quest. Like, oh hey, your folks were in a village, and at that point, the problem is at that point it's not random anymore. Now it's a DM constructed thing. But like you're in a village one night and they're like, oh, those fucking bear attacks, they've got all our cows. Well, the next day maybe there's a random encounter with bears. It's at least like set it up a bit.
Plot twist: the cows killed the bears.
That's right.
Now you have to deal with cows.
Exactly what we ended up saying with the traveler, wasn't it? That if you're doing random encounters, they need to have a point.
Yeah.
So
the challenge I have with that is if you're just doing the quests, what ends up happening is, and the quests, for some of these, especially the lower levels, you do a quest, boom, you move up a level. You do another quest or two, boom, you move up a level. I mean, you level up from 1 to 5, you go pretty quick. And it's almost every game or every second game you're moving up a level.
Unless you're playing in my Tomb of Annihilation campaign.
Yeah. But I don't know. That's maybe it's just me, but that's I just feel like it goes so quick those lower levels, and they're so squishy. They're fun to play with when you're a DM.
That's very yeah.
I mean, a lot of D&D is built around and supported for those low levels, though. And that's I cite as evidence all of Wizards 5e adventures that go from like 1 to 10. Like a good chunk of those campaigns are for those squishy like low levels.
Feels like mechanically it's kind of built to usher you through those early levels pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So you do kind of get in that situation. It's like, well, do we want to just stretch? Like, if you're doing milestone, do I want to just stretch this out?
Yeah.
Like, do like 5 quests before I let you level up? Something like that. Even if the experience that you would have gained wouldn't have really equated to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think.
Or do you just let them level up to whatever, and then just start a new campaign at some point? Like, all right, you guys have outpaced me. Time for new characters.
Yeah, and like. For milestone leveling and for Tomb, like you guys straight up at one point said, "Oh, we don't have to go to this dungeon. We have it on our map already." And I thought, "Oh shit! I guess I did mention you only have to like map it out, not go there." And I wanted them to go there. And then I thought, "Well, fuck. We've spent enough time in the jungle. I've got a lot of content planned. We're just doing milestones, so it's not like they, feel like they need to get over here to get a bunch of experience or something. So we just dropped that. That was an Engalore. We just dropped that whole area, the Hanging Gardens area. And I didn't feel bad about that one. I mean, it sucks to never use that map because it was a cool map, but with Milestone, it was just I felt like I had enough content for each level by far.
And that is kind of comes back to something we were talking about earlier about like players just being able to ignore things. But if it's in the role playing thing, like how bad can you feel about that? Like, for example, the second area of this current campaign, the woods, there's a bunch of stuff that you guys came across, but you're like, but this doesn't really have anything to do with what we're here to do, so we're not going to do it. Kevin's going to open a door and see a bunch of spiders and be like, why would I go in there? No, close the door.
This door's full of spiders. I'm not going in there. Like that.
And and I don't know if the psychology of a player, if they were getting XP, would they want to do everything? But I don't feel like they need to. Like if your characters really do feel like, we're here to do we're on a mission, and a room full of spiders is not conducive to that mission.
I don't know, dude. Some groups would probably treat it more like a hack and slash action RPG and be like, we're going to fight everything, especially if you're getting experience for that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to take everything down and see if it's got some loot in there. And some folks maybe not. Like, I think we understand how Especially, again, this is very much like we're at that high level too, where it's like our combats all have to like be meaningful and be these epic, like huge encounters now at this point. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they're just kind of we're not gonna mess around with it. Which it'll be interesting going back to those low levels to see if we can be trained to go back to where combat maybe doesn't take that long and can be kind of grueling, just because not because of the high damage, just because everybody's so squishy. Yeah, I think I'm definitely pretty married to milestones at this point. And with that being said, I have learned that I need to be better at pacing the milestone leveling.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing, is that when you take on milestones, you're taking all the responsibility on yourself as the DM.
Yeah.
You're not letting the game answer the question for you. Now it's on your back to answer the question.
And I think some DMs, when they do milestone, they actually like keep track of the experience the players are earning and try to calculate like, okay, here's, at this point they've earned this much experience, so I need to like level them up somewhere around here. I never did that in my game. I didn't keep track of experience at all, and I just had like, okay, here's where I want them to level up, here's where I want them to level up. And sure enough, it felt like in those low levels, especially, you guys were low levels for quite a while.
Right.
So I think I'm going to try to do a better job of maybe trying to track it, but also not trying to stack too much in those low levels. And thankfully, in the case of Rime, they give you a lot of content, and it's more about DMs like picking and choosing which ones you want to use. And then you throw it to the players, and hopefully the players realize they can kind of pick and choose what they want to do for a while. And knowing that, it's just whatever content you want to experience, knowing you're not really gaining literal mechanical experience for this, but you will be getting, checkboxes that the DM is ticking off, and you'll be leveling up accordingly. Let's do final thoughts for our experience topics. Sam, what are your final thoughts on using experience in D&D?
I like milestones. I have always done milestones in my campaigns, apart from the one where we did XP and it didn't really work. So I will be sticking to milestones and just hoping that we get the pacing right.
Yeah. Farty, experience.
I'm the same. I'll stick to milestone. I think it's something I'm comfortable with. I don't like tracking stuff, so it's probably the easiest.
I'm with you there. I used to track so much crap, and now I dropped like everything into like there was so many rules about like rations and navigation, and holy shit, I just dropped all that so quick. I was like, this is gonna be fine without having to worry about all that. Chris, experience.
I fall in the same camp. I don't dislike XP as numbers. I just think that because of the way so many campaigns and the way so many DMs run their campaigns, if you do XP as numbers, you find yourself cheating anyway. You find yourself just giving them a certain amount of XP for a quest.
That did happen in Storms. We forgot to mention that. Yes. But in Storms, you were very much the Storm Kings.
I just fucking cheated.
Yeah, it was like, all right, you guys turned in this quest, and you gained as much experience as you need to get to level 4.
That's right.
Milestone.
Yep, that's right. So, it's like we were talking about before, that what you said, it's just milestone with extra steps. Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of people who use XP as numbers come to at a certain point. It's like, well, I'm giving them this amount of XP for combat, I'm giving this amount of XP for exploration or quests. I'm just doing milestones with extra steps because I'm making the decision. So just do milestones, make the decision, and move on.
Yeah, I will say I'd love to hear from folks who use experience, and I would love to hear maybe what kind of extra rules they have for that.
I want the XP number purists to come at us.
Yeah, for sure.
Come at us hard.
Come at me and explain, what your crunchy system is for rewarding experience. If you do, expanding on skill check completions or quests or whatever else, I would love to know that. Not that I would use it, but I would love to be able to look at it and figure out what the pacing is like and all that. I think for now, for our next campaign, I don't think I ever considered going back out from Milestone, but I do know that we were low level way too long in Tomb. That was partly because of the way Tomb was structured. And I will be fixing that, so there will not be that big long stretch of like 10 sessions at level 4, whatever it was at one point. I think we're literally like 9 or 10 sessions for each level, which definitely felt way too long. So, and I plan on, in other words, I will say this. I think Rime will be as long or shorter than Tomb, and I plan on getting you guys to a higher level by the end, significantly higher level, which is all partly what I'm going to have to hack together because stupid Wizards does not apparently support Tier 3 and Tier 4 play, which that can be another topic for another roundtable, which would be a good topic for Chris to come in again, because obviously we have a lot of experience doing that now in our current campaign. So thank you to Sam, Farty, and special guest Chris for joining me for this month's DM Roundtable. I am Eric. Hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion. You got to go to your bye thing, Chris.
Oh, bye.
Bye.